Cordell Broadus adjusted the sleeves of his custom-cut blazer as he stepped into the towering Manhattan studio. It was a gray morning, but his confidence gleamed like sunshine. He had practiced for this casting for weeks, rehearsing his walk, refining his angles, studying every nuance of the brand. Today was supposed to be his moment. But less than 10 minutes after his arrival, he was walking back out the same door he came in, confused, disappointed, and blindsided. No feedback, no notes, just a polite, "We've decided to go in another direction." But what stung wasn't the rejection. It was the whisper he overheard as he passed the casting director's assistant. "We're not looking for a celebrity's son. It's not authentic to our brand." Cordell didn't need to guess who they meant. Being the son of Snoop Dogg came with baggage he didn't pack. If stories of resilience and defying odds inspire you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. To the outside world, Cordell Broadus had it all. Fame, access, wealth. His last name opened doors most could only dream of. But what the world didn't see was how many of those doors slammed shut the moment people realized who he was. Not because he was unwelcome, but because he was unwanted as himself. Everything he earned was viewed through the filter of his father's shadow. Cordell wasn't chasing the spotlight. In fact, he had once walked away from a promising football career at UCLA, despite national attention. To many, it seemed foolish. Who leaves behind Division I football? But Cordell had always known. His path wasn't made of yards and end zones. It was made of fabrics, silhouettes, and storytelling. Fashion had always called to him. It was how he expressed himself. Not through beats like his father, but through visuals. Through streetwear that spoke of culture, identity, and vision. His room as a teenager had been more mood board than bedroom. Magazines stacked on one side, sketches on the other. He didn't just want to wear clothes, he wanted to create meaning through them. Still, walking into the fashion world as Snoop Dogg's son came with its own strange paradox. He was instantly recognizable, but rarely respected. The assumption followed him everywhere. He's only here because of who his dad is. Every campaign he landed was undercut by cynicism, every achievement diluted by doubt. But Cordell wasn't naive. He knew the modeling world wasn't fair. He also knew he had advantages others didn't. What hurt wasn't envy, it was invisibility. He could feel that people weren't seeing him. They were seeing a name, a legacy, a shortcut. That casting in Manhattan had been different, though, or at least he thought so. The brand was edgy, disruptive, rooted in urban culture. He had envisioned himself in their upcoming campaign, not as a star's son, but as a voice from the streets with his own story. But once again, the past he didn't choose had chosen for him. Back in his hotel room, Cordell stared at the skyline. He wasn't angry. He was tired. Tired of pretending it didn't matter. Tired of acting like he didn't hear the whispers. For the first time in months, he questioned whether modeling was worth it, whether any of it was. He looked at his reflection in the window and saw more than himself. He saw the weight of expectations, the burden of a name, the hunger for something real. And for the first time he wondered, could he ever be enough without shedding the name that gave him everything? He didn't know it yet, but that rejection would become the catalyst for something greater than he ever imagined. In the weeks that followed the Manhattan rejection, Cordell tried to shake it off. He told himself it wasn't personal. Maybe they really were going in another direction. But the words echoed louder each time he tried to forget. We're not looking for a celebrity's son. That wasn't the first time he'd felt dismissed, but it was the first time it stung this deeply, because this time he had believed he was there on merit. Not because of his name, not because of a favor, but because he genuinely belonged. Still, the pattern repeated. Cordell showed up to auditions prepared, polished, and professional, but the same looks, the same hesitant smiles, the same polite rejections. After a while, even the most confident heart begins to crack. He started hearing the same phrase whispered behind his back, "Nepo baby." At first it rolled off him. It was just noise. But then it began to dig. Not because it was offensive, but because he couldn't tell if it was true. Was he truly building a career on his own? Or had he been handed a lane others didn't get a chance to enter? That question tormented him, not because he doubted his work ethic, but because he realized how many people refused to look past his last name. Cordell had worked hard. He trained, studied fashion, stayed humble, collaborated with lesser-known photographers, took small gigs just to grow. But none of that seemed to matter. The label came first. Always. He began distancing himself from the industry. He stopped posting updates, stopped accepting minor jobs, pulled away from the spotlight. He felt lost, not because he didn't know who he was, but because no one else seemed willing to find out. In his silence, he turned inward. And in that quiet, he did something he hadn't done in a while. He opened up to his father. Snoop Dogg had always supported Cordell's decisions, even the ones others questioned. He hadn't pressured him to rap, hadn't tried to mold him into his image. But Cordell had rarely talked to him about the pain of being his son. That night he did. They sat on the patio of their Los Angeles home, the city humming softly below them. Cordell told him about the rejection, about how the industry didn't see him, about how even his victories felt hollow, overshadowed by assumptions. And he asked the question he had buried for too long. Will I ever be enough, just being me? Snoop didn't answer right away. He looked out at the night for a long time before he spoke. When I started, he said, I wasn't supposed to make it. They said I was a gangster, a dropout, a problem. They saw a stereotype. I had to prove I was more. And I did by staying true even when the world wanted something else. Cordell listened in silence. People are always going to put you in a box, Snoop continued. Your box just happens to have my name on it. That's not your fault, but what you do next, that's your story. Cordell nodded slowly. You don't need to run from the name, Snoop said. But you do need to make them remember yours. That night didn't erase the pain, but it planted something deeper. A shift, a challenge. Setbacks weren't the end, they were blueprints. And the real question wasn't if Cordell could step out of his father's shadow, but whether he could build something so bold, so honest, that the world would have no choice but to see him. In the weeks after that conversation, something changed in Cordell. He wasn't waiting for validation anymore. He stopped chasing castings, stopped begging for a seat at tables that didn't want him. If they wouldn't see him for who he was, he would show them, on his own terms. He dove deep into his own vision. He started sketching ideas, building mood boards, reconnecting with the creative side that once made him fall in love with fashion. But this time, he wasn't trying to fit anyone's mold. He was creating something that felt like him, raw, street-rooted, honest. He reached out to a few independent photographers he had worked with in the past, people who knew his hustle, not his last name. Together they began developing a concept that merged fashion with narrative. Each look would tell a story, not a glossy, curated fantasy, but a real one, of struggle, of legacy, of finding voice in the middle of noise. Cordell didn't want to model someone else's vision anymore. He wanted to produce, direct, create. So he started curating a campaign, his campaign. He scouted models from neighborhoods he grew up in, collaborated with stylists who understood both couture and the corner store. He borrowed warehouse space, hired a small crew, and shot everything with minimal gear and maximum intention. The theme was simple: authenticity, not the buzzword, the lived version. Each photo in the campaign was paired with personal statements, from the models, from Cordell, from voices that were usually filtered, if heard at all. They spoke about expectations, identity, assumptions, about being more than someone's kid, someone's statistic, someone's role. The result wasn't polished in the traditional sense, but it was magnetic. And when Cordell posted the final product on his social media, he didn't tag any brands. He didn't mention his last name. Just a caption, "This is me." At first it got a few hundred likes, then a few thousand, then a surge. Something about the campaign struck a nerve. It wasn't just fashion, it was a message. And people felt it, not just his fans, not just those who followed him because of Snoop, but new voices, creatives, designers, young kids trying to carve out space for themselves. Suddenly, Cordell's DMs were filled with collaborations, invitations, praise. But this time it was different. They weren't asking to work with Snoop's son. They were asking to work with Cordell Broadus, the storyteller, the visionary. What he didn't know was that behind the scenes, his father had been watching quietly. Snoop never interfered, never offered to make calls or pull strings. But once Cordell started building his own space, Snoop reached out to a few key figures in the black fashion community, not to promote his son, but to invite mentorship. He told them, "My son's got a vision. I'm not helping him get a job. I'm helping him find his tribe." Soon, Cordell found himself in conversations with some of the most creative minds in the industry, designers, art directors, even culture curators. But what impressed them wasn't his connections. It was his clarity, his willingness to start from the ground up, to listen, to learn. The campaign didn't just go viral, it shifted how people saw him. Blogs picked it up. Style magazines praised its boldness. Influencers reposted it. But no one mentioned Snoop Dogg. And that was the point. For the first time, Cordell wasn't standing in a shadow. He was casting his own. The ripple effect of Cordell's campaign reached farther than he ever imagined. What began as a personal expression started to shift the way people in the industry talked about voice, image, and identity. Soon, major fashion houses took notice. But this time, they weren't extending shallow invitations. They were asking to collaborate on his terms. A well-known designer from Paris reached out with a simple message. "We see you. Let's build something different." Cordell flew out, not as an accessory to fame, but as a force with ideas, angles, and a vision that couldn't be ignored. The moment he stepped onto the runway at Paris Fashion Week, wearing pieces he helped co-create, the room held its breath. It wasn't just a walk, it was a statement, a reclamation. And when the lights dimmed, the applause wasn't just polite, it was real. Back home, the headlines changed tone. They no longer read, "Snoop Dogg's son tries modeling." Now they said, "Cordell Broadus redefines creative legacy." The shift was subtle but seismic. For years, his name had been an echo of another man's success. Now it stood alone. Amid the rising momentum, Cordell and Snoop found themselves reconnecting not just as father and son, but as artists. The experience had revealed something powerful in both of them, how legacy could evolve. Not by imitation, but through dialogue. They began working together on a docu-series. It wasn't about fame, it was about the tension between legacy and individuality. About growing up under a spotlight and trying to find your own reflection. The episodes featured conversations with other second-generation artists, designers, and musicians who faced the same invisible walls. The project struck a nerve. Viewers saw a side of fame rarely explored. The pressure, the assumptions, the quiet need to be seen for who you really are. The series sparked discussions across platforms, from think pieces to reaction videos. What resonated most wasn't celebrity, it was truth. Through all of this, Cordell remained grounded. He still met with small creatives, still worked with grassroots collectives, still said yes to projects that aligned with his values. He knew what it felt like to be overlooked. And he didn't want to become the kind of gatekeeper who once shut him out. There was one moment, though, that hit differently. After a speaking panel on creative identity, a teenage boy approached him and said, "You made me realize I don't have to apologize for where I come from." Cordell thanked him, but inside he paused. That one sentence meant more than all the press combined. Because that was the goal. Not just to break out, but to help others break in. Over time, people stopped comparing him to his father, not because Snoop had faded, but because Cordell had found his own frequency, a different beat, one that didn't need to be louder, just distinct. He wasn't trying to escape his father's name anymore. He was honoring it by living honestly, not as an echo, but as evolution, and that evolution was catching fire. From campuses to conferences, Cordell's story became a case study in defying narrative. Professors referenced it, young artists mimicked it, influencers cited him as proof that authenticity wasn't just a buzzword, it was a blueprint. In every room he walked into now, he wasn't being asked, "Whose son are you?" People already knew. What they wanted to ask instead was, "What are you building next?" With his place in the industry firmly rooted, Cordell turned his attention to something even greater than recognition, impact. He had built a name, yes, but now he wanted to build bridges. Not everyone had the tools, the access, or the mentorship he'd eventually received. And he couldn't forget what it felt like to be on the outside, wondering if you'd ever be seen. So he launched a mentorship collective, part incubator, part creative lab. Its mission was clear: empower young artists from underrepresented backgrounds to develop their voice and vision. The focus wasn't on fame, but on substance, on teaching craft, not chasing clout. He named it Unlabeled, a nod to his own journey of breaking free from other people's definitions. Within months, applications poured in, not because of who was behind it, but because of what it stood for. Photographers, stylists, videographers, writers, young, hungry, full of ideas but unsure of direction. Cordell brought in mentors from across industries and emphasized collaboration over competition. Every Friday, the group met in a converted studio in downtown LA, a space filled with open walls, shared tables, and big questions. "What are you trying to say?" was asked more often than, "What do you want to be?" And slowly visions sharpened. Confidence grew. Unlabeled wasn't just helping launch careers. It was healing identity. It was a home for those who, like Cordell, had once felt boxed in by expectation. Months later, Cordell hosted a showcase. The rooftop event gathered artists from across the city. The models walking that night weren't famous. The designers hadn't been featured in magazines. But the energy in the room was electric, because it was real. As Cordell watched from the sidelines, one of the models walked over, barely older than 18, eyes wide with gratitude. "I'm here because of you," he whispered. Cordell smiled and simply said, "Nah, you're here because of you." I just built the door. When the lights faded and the music slowed, Cordell stood quietly, overlooking the city that had once felt like a maze. Now it felt like a map. His path hadn't been easy. It hadn't followed any script. But it was his, and for the first time that was enough. Legacy, he realized, wasn't about repeating greatness. It was about expanding it. About honoring where you come from without being defined by it. About choosing to stand, not in the shadow of the past, but beside it, bringing new light. And as his story continued to inspire thousands, one truth echoed above all else. Being born into a legacy is one thing. Choosing what to do with it, that's what defines you. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe to the channel and join a community of dreamers, builders, and believers. And don't miss the next inspiring story. Click the video on screen to keep watching.